And today's topic that we've assigned is the palliative care assessment and management in motor neuron disease. And having gone through some of the materials that we've covered in the past few lectures, I noticed we've spoken about feeding, about ventilation, advanced care planning, the role of physiotherapy, managing secretions, and quite a number of issues really where we thankfully had experts to brief us about it. And that's why for today's session, I thought about going into something which is a bit of a pet topic of mine, something that we, in fact, ourselves, and Shusian is able to talk about it, learned from patients, where we noticed that a patient first used this technology and then we learned from her about it, and that is so-called augmentative and alternative communication. So today my topic will be going from frustration to wisdom with augmentative and alternative communication. And the reason is that if we're talking about the palliative care assessment, then palliative care, if you will, is mostly about communication, really. If we consider the surgeons, often they would use the scalpel as their logo, so to speak. And that's the intervention which the surgical team is using. And I always wonder what would be the logo of the palliative team. Is it like a hand holding a heart, or you could think of many things, but maybe it's a speech bubble. It's the fact that palliative care is really about communication and realizing that communication can be very powerful in a positive and in a negative sense, much like you would hope that palliative physicians can hold a scalpel the wrong way and the right way around. We should be able to communicate in a proper way. And for the overview of today, I will talk a bit about the theory of communication. It's kind of a low-level introduction because it's a topic that I suspect for many of us hasn't featured in medical school. Is sort of on the fringe in medical education, somewhat limited to the allied health sciences. And I think it's a loss for patients if things were to be this way, because just getting a bit of an understanding of the theory of communication goes very far in helping patients who have difficulties with communication. Then I will show you two low-tech approaches to communication that are very easy to use, that you can practice practically anywhere and anytime where you have patients struggling to communicate with no cost except perhaps 5 or 10 cents for a piece of paper. And thirdly, we will go into some of the high-tech approaches to communication difficulties, which are thankfully also becoming a lot more affordable. So going back to the example I mentioned, the first time we became aware of this, a patient had in fact bought a device, which I think at the time had cost nearly 20,000 ringgit or so, that did in fact allow her to communicate with the help of a computer. But things since then have thankfully improved a lot. And I would guess that even the regular handphone that every one of us carries in their pocket can be tremendously useful for patients in a way that I will show you. So my two promises are that you will walk away today with a good grasp on what you can do wherever you are dealing with this problem. And finally, I hope there are some questions and answers and we can have a bit of a discussion. And also, I actually look forward to linking up with as many people as possible in building the expertise and also bringing this technology to patients. So with that, where else to start if not with Stephen Hawking himself, the person who has inspired so many and is missed so dearly. And not least because he really is the person who comes to mind when we think of anyone struggling with MND and doing so in a truly triumphant way. I mean, his example is literally of having impacted the lives of so many through sharing the wonders of the universe, most of all. I can warmly recommend reading A Short History of Time. It's a really useful reading and speaks to the talent that he undoubtedly had in bringing people closer to the wonders of the universe and explaining it in a very nice way. And mind you, having done it all while using augmentative and alternative communication. And of course, he is well known for having used this computer voice, through which his humor nevertheless shone very brightly and very memorably. And in our current time, we also have a very a growing number of patients living with ALS, MND, who are really standing out in the way that they are putting to use technology in communicating and putting up this great effort to overcome the adversity. So for example, if you have some time, I warmly recommend looking up this blog and Twitter account of Sarah Ezekiel, who is producing the awesome pieces of art that you see in the bottom here, and doing so using nothing but an eye tracker to design them. And just to give you a glimpse of what it's like when she's communicating, and she often does in symposia and other events, I will show you a short video of her speaking.
I think that the association has raised its profile immensely since Sally became Chief Executive Officer. We now have wonderful celebrity patrons who raise awareness amongst the public, which is so important. Hopefully, more awareness will lead to a cure. There have been so many great events and I've met many lovely people since being involved with the association. It's hard to choose one. I'm proud to have appeared in Sarah's story, the first broadcast advert made by the association. It was hard work for me, being on set all day, but I really liked the film and it's raised lots of awareness. I hope the association becomes redundant because a cure is found. Failing that, I hope it carries on as it is, because it's doing a fantastic job.
I'm not sure how many of you might have had the chance to speak to someone who is using a speech generating device like this, but this is really just to give you a glimpse of what it is like and how people are overcoming it, and really how a person with an intact mind but a paralyzed body is able to communicate. So do look up Sarah Ezekiel. And as a doctor, I believe most of you might be from that background. You may share with me that we went through medical school having to learn first about physiology, since it is very much the basis of every treatment that we may eventually give to patients. And basic physiology, of course, is about some very basic numbers, which I kind of crunched this morning for your benefit and figured that would be amounting to breathing about 7,000 liters of air per day, and we burn 2,000 calories of energy in a day, and we produce urine about 0.5 to 1 ml per kg body weight at minimum, and also we excrete about 120 grams of solid waste. But yet, if we consider palliative care again being about improving the quality of life and taking a holistic approach, going beyond the biomedical, physical, psychosocial, even to the spiritual, then I think there is more to IO. And what else goes in and out? It's of course communication. And communication can be measured. It can be put into figures. And if we did it going by the research available, various sources that you might quote, but roughly it would seem that the average person would speak at a speed of about 120 words per minute. And that amounts to an average of 10,000 to 30,000 words in a day. And if you then do the division, it works out to talking about 3 or 4 hours in a day. I suppose everyone has their slightly different figures here, but that's roughly how much we do communicate. And going even a step further back into what's the meaning of communication, we can use this hierarchical scheme here, where basically when we are communicating, what we share travels along these different levels. At the most basic level, there is data. Above the data, information, knowledge, and wisdom. So what is data? Essentially what you would call bits ones and zeros. And of course, the original predecessor of the ones and zeros were the dit and da of the Morse code that was revolutionary in its age and allowed us to communicate at the speed of light. And it's just quite mind-boggling to think how far things have moved, where in today's age, data being the new gold of the information age, what has really become of the dit and da of those days in terms of what we're able to do with data now. But nevertheless, data is really just ones and zeros. How do we go from ones and zeros onwards? And that's where there's a process which leads to information. What is information? Information is what results if we have data that is following a particular encoding. And an encoding would be that we understand that, for example, a given set of dits and das corresponds to particular letters. So we might say that E, the letter E, is encoded by a dit in the Morse code. Or we might say in a binary number format, the number 2 would be encoded by a 1 and a 0 as opposed to the decimal system. And that is the encoding which moves us from data to information. And from there on, we move to knowledge. What is knowledge? Of course, you could say it's just being aware of facts or aware of skills, having some sort of a mental representation of some matter of fact. Above that, what is wisdom? I actually scratched my head, and I suppose wisdom is not having to look it up on Wikipedia. And if you're honest, I don't know what is wisdom, because wisdom is obviously above the knowledge. But one of the reasons that I'm here today and kind of feel this sort of enthusiasm about AAC is that when you have a chance to be in the presence of patients with MND and with their families as well, and you appreciate that, yes, they do struggle, but they also do teach us a lot about what is the essence of communication and what it would be like if your communication wasn't as it is now, where you're just able to string together as many words as you'd like, and where your communication is in fact a lot more about sharing wisdom. So from experience, I can say, and I think you might share the experience, we share wisdom around the presence of patients living with motor neuron disease, overcoming it, and also the way that it affects the communication. So just as a small flashback in history for a nostalgia, if you look at the top here, you see the good old telegraph from the early days, where it was agreed that letters are encoded in dits and das. And if it was possible, it would be kind of nice to have a virtual show of hands, but let's just leave it at that. You might know that a sinking ship, God beware that you ever found yourself in the situation. If you ever had to send a signal of distress, it could be using a Morse code key, or you might have a flashlight. What you should send to save our souls is basically dididit, da da da, dididit, and that would be the agreed encoding for SOS in the International Morse code. And just as an interesting follow-up, once again, I'd be curious, but anyway, how many of you might remember the Nokia phones of old days where you got SMS and then it said Nini, Nanana, Nini? So that was the pun on the Morse code of old, because it turns out that the M in Morse code is da da, as opposed to the O being da da da. So they just did this brilliant pun by encoding SMS as dididit da da dididit. Just a fun fact. And what really was the initial spark of our information age probably goes back to the person on the left here, Claude Shannon, who did pioneering work in the field. And his approach to information basically paved the way for our modern encodings and enabled modern computer communication. So you could say that, once again, going back to encodings, how do we go about sharing information in terms of data? We need an encoding. So for example, if I were to ask you, what have you had for breakfast? It's going to be either one of nasi lemak, mihun, cornflakes, nothing, just a fruit. So probably less than a dozen different choices will cover what most of you had for breakfast. So that means that if I had a single digit going from, let's just say 0 to 9, that would cover 9 different choices of breakfast. And obviously, using a Roman alphabet, in a lot of instances, we need to encode 1 out of 26 different characters in the alphabet. And if you consider that every bit can carry 2 states, either 1 or 0, it's a matter of just multiplying 2 a certain number of times. So for example, if I had 1 bit, I can convey 2 possible information, 1 or 0. If I had 2, it would be 2 times 2. I can convey 4 different characters. If I had 3 bits, I could convey 8 possible characters, 2 times 2 times 2. And so it goes on until, at the very least, to transmit a letter in the 26 letter Roman alphabet, we would need 5 bits, because that's what you need to transmit 32 possible characters, 2 to the power of 5 being 32. So if we had those 5 bits, we could do it. But it turns out that historically, what was common in use was the so-called ASCII table. And the ASCII table is an encoding of ones and zeros here, representing a certain minimum amount of characters in the Roman alphabet, and with some special characters. So you can see the greater, larger, equal sign, / delete key, brackets. So actually that served us pretty well for many years. And it only took up 7 bits. So if you look at it, there's 3 bits here from 5 to 7, and then there's 4 bits in the bottom. So it's a total of 7 bits. And that is suitable if you happen to use a Roman encoding. So just for example, the letters that are represented here, the capital A would be in decimal 65, and in binary that's 0, 1, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 1, and the small letter A would be 97. Just as another fun fact, if you come across this kind of hacker culture, a very popular symbol is the asterisk or the star, because it's the wildcard symbol. It can stand for anything, and it has the decimal representation 42, which was popularized in the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy as a meme very much. So it's really going back to the ASCII table. Yeah, so what will we do if we also need to convey pi? And I don't know what this letter stands for. Most of you will know what this stands for. I regrettably don't. Or the A or the infinity. And you can imagine with a few thousand characters added, you might easily need a lot more space. And that's where the so-called Unicode encoding has come in, which may actually use up to several bytes per character. But that's not a topic for today. But nevertheless, what is interesting is that since we can quantify information, and since we can consider human speech as a flow of information in a way, we could do this calculation where we consider a normal conversation where you're speaking about 120 words per minute. And let's just assume there are 7 characters in a word on average, probably a bit too high. That would be about 840 characters per minute. And if you consider once again that every character would need 5 bit in that most minimalistic encoding, you could say that we are communicating at a rate of 4,200 bits per minute, or even per second, that would be 70 bits per second. So if you imagine someone sitting at the mouse key doing dits and das, they'd have to do it 70 times in a second, which is mind-boggling. And I don't think so even the best telegraph staff are able to do it. And also interestingly, we could calculate, for example, how does the speed of speaking, sharing information through speech compared to the other ways of sharing data. So for example, if you consider what probably today is a low-end broadband line, like a entry plan probably, which has maybe 5 megabit per second, then you can easily do the maths to calculate that it's actually the equivalent of 58,182 people speaking at the same time, which really goes to demonstrate how much data we are able to share, and how you can go at this hierarchy, and what is the relationship between information data and knowledge. And also very interestingly, if you were to consider how much information is contained, for example, in the book War and Peace, which I suppose is a very widely considered brilliant piece of modern literature, and it contains 1,146 pages, which if you were to download is only 3.4 megabyte, which happens to be about the same amount of data that you would capture in your average cat handphone photo. So with that, I will move on to a kind of low-tech demonstration. And basically the question is, what can we do for supporting patients if they are in a situation where they cannot use their speech, for example. And having said that, if we see patients with MND, they may go through a disease progression where they could have different sort of communication problems at different times. So for example, if you were to imagine, what if you couldn't use your hands? Would it affect your communication? One might say, well, quite all right, I can speak, so I might just as well do that. And nevertheless, I think a lot of you are using handphones and would find it inconvenient having to use text-to-speech, for example, to send your SMS. But that's just one example of where you have to be aware that these ways that we have of supporting patients are something that is appropriate to consider at every stage of the disease. Even if someone doesn't have a good amount of use in their hands, if the power is diminished, it's very worthwhile that we find out with them what sort of problems does it mean for them in their day-to-day life. What would they like to be able to do that it is not possible to do without using their hands in terms of communication, for example. And likewise, if, for example, the disease progresses and patients lose their speech, it's very urgent that we look into what can be done to enable them to communicate. And thankfully, the important information that every patient needs to be aware of, and their carers as well, is that even though the disease may affect the limbs and the respiration, as well as bulbar muscles, there can be dysarthria, there can be dysphonia, but the disease will not involve extraocular muscles in the vast majority of cases. It will be exceptionally rare, and I think in our experience, hardly seen for someone to have any sort of limitation in their extraocular movements. So you can always look left, right, up, down, and that is not affected by the disease. And one very brilliant way that this has been put to use, as we'd like to share with you now. So basically, I shared this link with you, but there's this excellent resource by the Asha support group for MND patients in India. They have come up with this manual of how you can communicate. And I think it's very worth sharing. I will have to find out exactly what is their copyright on this, but it's freely available for download. And the way that it works is that really just based on eye movements, they have come up with a repertoire of certain phrases that are very helpful, that are often needed in communication, and put it into a dictionary. So basically, you have an alphabet of eye movements, and you have a corresponding dictionary of meanings of eye movements, and that is the way that it works. So you have these 8 keys, and they are meant to be learned in a gradual way. And I think this is a very good idea, because if we consider our experience in the real world with patients, we find that often people may get frustrated and find it very distressing not being able to communicate. And especially if we consider not having been able to communicate for a long time, there's just so much frustration and so much of impairment on the quality of life that we really need to be very gently introducing this, and also very much following the patient's own speed and adapting to this. So for example, at the very basic level, you can shut your eyes, you can blink, you can look left, right, up, down, or you can wink one eye. You can even see it on my webcam, or you could roll your eyes. So it's from the right to the left in this case. It doesn't really matter. You only have one way of, you only need to be able to roll in any case. So basically the way it works is that you would agree with the patient that long hold of shut eyes means starting communications. Furious blinking, wrong, means that whatever has been offered as a possible interpretation by the communicating partner is wrong. 1 blink means yes, 2 blinks means no, and so on. You can consider what are the most important items in our day-to-day speech. So for example, I'm okay, I'm not okay. And this is really, I would say, essential and speaks to the common sense and really the pragmatism that they applied in coming up with this. It's really a simple thing to do, either blinking 3 times or looking 2 directions and blinking once. And I think it's very worthwhile if you want to familiarize yourself with it. The next time you have a chance, check to see if this might be helpful for your patient. Okay, so call a guardian, call a doctor. 4 blinks, I want to sleep. Keep looking left, there's breathlessness. Left, right, you'd like some water. Looking up, toilet, and so on. So basically a brilliant approach, and I will share the link to this with you and urge you to look into it and see if you might find it helpful. Another way to communicate is through so-called e-tran boards. And e-tran boards are, like shown here, quite simply just large sheets of paper or plexiglass or whichever material that is suitable, where you can attach the labels holding the letters. And those letters are attached on both sides of this board, which is held up. So I'm not sure if you can see my mouse pointer, but for example, if you look at the PQR here, you can see that it sticks to both sides of the transparent frame. So there's a PQR here on the standing person's left hand, and facing the other side is a PQR as well. So from the standing lady's perspective here, the PQR will be on the left side, whereas from the seated lady's position here, the PQR is on the right side. And that way you can have a frame, no pun intended, you can have a frame of reference where looking in one of those directions gives an indication of the desired letter. So for example, if you were to, so you don't have another example of it, but if you were to look at the top left corner from the seated lady's perspective here, then the standing partner would say, is it an A, is it a B, or is it a C? And then the person would blink at the desired letter. Or else you can actually refine it a bit in a sense that you can print the letters in different colors. So for example, this might be red, this might be green, this might be blue. And then they would look at the square containing the letter desired, and then in a second message they would look in another direction, which is represented as a color hierarchically indicating the letter within this board. So I will share the link to this as well. It's literally as easy as taking a piece of paper and tearing out a piece in the middle and scribbling some stuff in the corners and holding it between yourself and the patient who you need to communicate with. Obviously, it's also need a bit of getting used to, but generally speaking, it works quite well and is pragmatic. Now, for the high-tech demonstration, I would like to show you 2 YouTube videos because I find that it's a bit more pragmatic than what I could prepare myself. And the first one of which is demonstrating an Android feature, which is present in the most recent Android devices. And it comes under the option of accessibility. So if you go to your phone's setup and change the settings there, you can reach one point that is called accessibility, and it lets you use the phone through other than the touchscreen gestures by using either physical switches, which are basically just buttons, or else using eye gaze. And I'll show you the videos to demonstrate it.
Welcome to Switch Access. Switch Access is an alternative to using the touchscreen for users with limited dexterity. Turn on Switch Access in the Accessibility Settings menu. This will enable linear scanning and allow the use of a switch or keyboard to interact with your Android device. Start scanning by pressing the switch, and once the item you want is highlighted, select it by pressing the switch again. There are many hardware options available. Choose what works best for you. To change options or access the setup guide, select Settings within the Switch Access menu. This menu offers customized options to meet your individual needs. From messages to maps, access your world with a Switch.
So what you've seen there is a physical switch, and they've portrayed a few of the commercially available options which you'd have to buy at possibly relative costly price. The alternative is if you are able to, for example, as a patient, use a finger even with a minimal amount of power left in a finger, for example, and might be able to press a keyboard button, then you could connect a USB keyboard to the handphone USB port and connect that as the switch. Whilst you can sort of design your own switch, which I think for anyone who is slightly technically inclined is not too difficult, and I think that's probably in time to come going to be more easy, and likely there'll be more hardware available that would let you use a switch, for example, using facial muscles just by twitching your cheek, for example. If you had a switch that is connected, you can use that, and it will be feeding into the Android accessibility software. And the other option I want to show you as well is doing just that, allowing people to use an Android phone without having any physical, without any muscle power other than their extra ocular eye movements. And this works on the use of the forward-facing cameras. So just to give you an idea of what it looks like, have a look at this, please.
Help people with speech and Camera Switches is a new Android accessibility feature that can help people with speech and motor impairments to navigate their phone using eye movements and facial gestures. It turns the phone's front-facing camera into a switch, so you can choose one movement to scan and another to select. By choosing two simple gestures, the whole of Android is now more accessible to more people. Pick a combination of gestures that works for you and customize them to your range of movement.
And if you have a bit of time today to spare, I would urge you to try it out. I can say it actually works. It's sort of depending on lighting and I suppose features of the phone, but generally speaking, it's usable, and it would let you use the phone. And that's something which I think patients are very glad to be able to do, because literally it would connect them through all their social media apps and being able to browse the web. It's a real jump in quality of life for patients. So do try it out. Then the other option that I've alluded to before, which in fact we learned from a patient who had at first used it, are so-called eye trackers. And eye trackers have come a long way from having been very expensive devices, as I said, in the range of 20,000, 30,000 ringgit, to now thankfully costing about 1,000 ringgit or less if you purchase overseas. And that's because the original devices by this company, which I have no links for the company, were marketed as medical grade communication devices. And since then they have become available for the purposes of gaming, but nevertheless they are useful in AAC as well, and at a much lower cost of about 1,000 ringgit. So I show you just another video to introduce how it works, because it's a bit easier rather than me explaining.
Eye tracking is a technology that is used to see where a person is looking on a computer screen. The technology can also be used to control a computer. Instead of using a traditional keyboard and mouse, you control it by using your eyes. Illuminators in the eye tracker send out near-infrared light that is reflected by your eyes. A camera registers these reflections, and through filtering and advanced calculations, we can determine where on the screen you are looking, and then place the computer cursor consistently and accurately. There are certain things that set Tobii Dynavox eye trackers apart from others. Besides an unprecedented patent portfolio and many technical details, one is the fact that we use a unique and very accurate 3D model of a human eye. With this model, you don't need to keep your head still when using a Tobii eye tracker. In fact, you can move your head freely without any significant loss of precision or accuracy. This is particularly beneficial for individuals with uncontrolled head movement, such as those with cerebral palsy. For accurate eye tracking, the eye tracker needs to find your pupils. This can be done through either bright or dark pupil tracking. Bright pupil tracking works similarly to when you get red eyes using a compact camera with a flash. By placing the flash, or in this case the illuminators, farther away from the lens, you can avoid this. This is dark pupil tracking. Tobii Dynavox eye trackers are unique in that they dynamically switch between bright and dark pupil tracking, so you'll always have an optimized eye tracking experience. There are many other things that make Tobii Dynavox eye trackers unique. To learn more, please visit Tobii.
So that's just to give you an idea of how it works. The device itself that we are using in Malaysia here now, that we have had some experience using, is about this size. Is just a bar that has a USB connection, and then it sticks using a magnet to the lower bit of the lower bezel of the screen, and then it detects the eye movement as what was shown just now. So probably if I was sitting like I am now against a window that has a lot of glare from the back, it may not work very well. But even so, the technology has improved a bit, and it does work remarkably well once the setup is good. And that means being seated in a more or less stable position in front of the PC, and also having had a good amount of time to practice with it. So I haven't done the proper speed run recently, but I would estimate that if given a chance and everything was optimal, I could probably type with a bit of practice nearly as fast as I'm typing physically. Not least because my touch type technique is not so good, but you can actually go to a very respectable speed, and people have written novels, and it is really working very well if once it's set up. And the other bit I like to show is that while the device is a bit costly, and also at the moment you would have to import it from overseas, because as far as I knew, and the last time I checked, it's not for sale in Malaysia, but you have to buy it in UK or Europe. But the software to use it with is free, and that means the normal Windows 10 that most people already have has an eye tracking feature built in. But also you can download another great piece of software which is free of charge and open source, and was developed by this person who I will also show you here. And the software is called OptiKey.
Meet OptiKey. Full computer control and speech using only your eyes.
So you've seen the Julius Sweetland himself, the developer of this software, having composed an email in just about a minute and really showcasing that you can type hands off using this software. So basically, the reason I'm showing it is because it's quite been around for a while. It's very customizable. So you can adjust the speed at which it types. It can go much faster than what he's been using just now. And it works nicely with the Tobii eye trackers that are available. So if you do happen to see a patient who needs this, then do download the OptiKey, which I will share in the links as well. Then I can also show you two other very interesting approaches which have been used, and one of them being a software called Dasher that was developed at the University of Cambridge and has been somewhat gaining less of attention, but works on a brilliant idea. So the idea is that if I can move one finger to control a mouse, it might be difficult having to click many letters in sequence to string together words and even sentences. But nevertheless, if I can move the mouse quite freely, I can sort of drive around the screen, scroll, drive, move, whatever you want to call it. So let me just try to write a message, and you will see the message appearing in the text box below the menu bar there. Okay, so I'll write a message here just by moving the mouse around to the letter that I intend. And the letters are arranged, as you can see, alphabetically. And also they have a predictive mechanism underlying. That means that if you are about to, if you've put in two letters that likely will add to a common word, then it'll be enlarged in the letters that come up on the right-hand side, okay? So I will now go on to complete the sentence. Welcome. So it's basically just a matter of scrolling, and therefore quite natural to most of us who have spent a good amount of our lives scrolling. Okay, and once I'm done, I will just click here, and then the message is here. Welcome to MND Beyond Borders. So that's called Dasher, and it's also freely available, and it connects with a mouse. And I think if you're somewhat technically inclined, you could think of ways that a mouse could be modified for patients to use with whatever amount of movement that they can mobilize, that they can have at their disposal, either over the face or the hands. Yeah. And another very worthwhile link sharing is the so-called Asterix project from a group in Austria, and they have been doing generally awesome job in developing all kinds of communications aid, hardware as well as software aspects. And the most basic one is accessible if you just head over to this webpage, grid.asterix with a cs.edu. You get to this screen, and it's a very easily available communication board, essentially. So if you are opening it on the desktop, you can go to the full screen mode, and you get a nice interface that patients just have to click if they're able to click or write. You could also use it in connection with a eye tracker. I've done it before. It needs a bit of setup, but it's helpful in cases where patients may not be usually able to use Roman letters.
Switch language.
You can switch languages, a bit limited still.
Chinese.
But, so for example, you still have Chinese. You have Chinese and a few other languages. So once again, the way to get there is by going to grid.asterix.eu. And it does work on the handphone as well. It's a so-called responsible a responsive app, so it works nicely. It comes up in a well-formatted way, so you can minimize this. Then it's really helpful. That is, in fact, what I had to share for this short session. Take-home message, maybe just to summarize, is that dealing with this communication difficulties is something that that needs experience, or that we in fact can learn a lot from patients, really. And we find that there's a lot of concerns or reservations that one might have. And I think also on the part of the communication partners, it's very important to bear in mind that it is potentially very frustrating not being able to talk. And while that is the case, it is also true that often it is the so-called able person in the communication duo that is the problem, in a sense that we may lack the patience to let our communicating partner with motor neuron disease complete their sentence. So people may be quite willing to spend the time and not even mind going to a long training session with an eye tracker, as long as they are able to communicate. And from experience, yeah, not least of the reasons I feel enthusiastic about it is because it's a really heartwarming, very special moment when you can see a patient who has not been able to speak for months and sometimes even years, and finally they're able to say something that has been very important and meaningful for them. So with that, do try it out. Do download the Blink to Speak manual, print it out, try it the next time you have a chance. Try out the eTren frame method, and do check on your Android phone the accessibilities. I should apologize not having had the opportunity to check on how it works in the Apple ecosystem, but I think it will be a matter of short time, likely, or if it's not even available already. And by all means, if you do have a case where you might think the patient might benefit from it and you'd like to get in touch, do not hesitate to drop me a mail. And with that, I would like to thank you for your attention.